The first sound was the clang of metal, sharp, deliberate, and wrong. Then came the unmistakable creak of my storm shelter's steel hatch swinging open. I was halfway through a mouthful of beef jerky and mid-sentence explaining thermal optics to Chainsaw Mitch when the noise hit me. All 5 of us froze. That door weighs 200 pounds and has a triple bar locking system. No one, and I mean no one, gets in from the outside unless they know the code, or unless they're deranged enough to bring bolt cutters to a Category 4 hurricane. There was only one person in our county who would be both clueless and entitled enough to try something like that. And sure enough, the next voice we heard was like nails on a chalkboard dipped in perfume and passive aggression. Ugh! This place smells like smoked meat and gasoline. Who even lives like this? Karen. She had just broken into the most fortified storm shelter in 5 counties. And she had no idea she'd just walked into the middle of a live-fire hurricane survival simulation run by my hunting club. This wasn't a spa day. This was war prep. And she had just declared herself the enemy. Now, before we get into how Karen wound up in the fetal position behind the dehydrated potatoes crying about patriarchal bunkers, let me set the scene. My name's Hank. I'm a rancher, a hunter, and the unofficial president of the No-Nonsense Storm Survival Club, which sounds fancier than it is. Basically, it's 5 guys who take hurricane season as seriously as most people take their fantasy football league. Every year, when the wind picks up and the radar turns into a Jackson Pollock painting, we meet up in my custom-built storm shelter, equipped with more tech than a small police station and enough jerky to outlast the apocalypse. Now the thing about storm shelters is there's sacred ground out here. Everyone knows not to trespass. It's like an unwritten code. You don't take someone else's lifeboat when the ship's going down. But Karen, well, Karen's not from around here. She moved in 6 months ago after divorcing her 4th husband, bought a faux country-style house on the edge of the subdivision, and immediately set out to turn our quiet corner of Texas into a gated HOA nightmare. She complained about roosters crowing too early, tried to get a leash law passed for free-range goat, and once reported me to the county for excessive flannel display. It didn't stick, but still, who does that? We'd already had our share of run-ins. She parked in my tractor turnaround once, got booted. She came to a town hall meeting trying to outlaw bonfires, got laughed out. And when she found out about my storm shelter, oh, the envy in her face could have melted steel. It's just not fair, she'd said once, clutching her designer purse like it was holy scripture. Why should he get a bunker while the rest of us make do with candlelight and bathtub water? The answer was simple. I built it, myself, with rebar, poured concrete, and an unhealthy amount of stubbornness. But I guess that logic didn't hold up when the wind started howling, and Karen realized her Instagram-perfect living room was about to become airborne. So, instead of preparing like the rest of us, she decided to cut her way into mine. With bolt cutters. During a hurricane. And let me tell you, she timed it perfectly. The worst part of the storm hadn't even hit yet. The moment she stepped down the ladder into the shelter, the whole mood shifted. The generator hummed low, casting a flickering light over the concrete walls lined with emergency supplies, weapon racks, and a disturbingly lifelike mannequin we used for rescue drills. Karen took one look around and said, "You boys seriously need a decorator." Chainsaw Mitch, who had literally once removed a live possum from his boot without flinching, blinked slowly and whispered, "Oh, hell no." Randy, our retired Green Beret, checked the safety on his sidearm, not to use it, just for emotional support. The rest of us sat stunned. There were many things we'd prepped for, power outages, water breaches, even rabid wildlife. But no one had made a contingency plan for Karen. She clomped across the concrete floor in leopard print rain boots like she owned the place and tossed her designer tote onto the emergency radio table. "All right," she said, clapping. "I'm willing to forgive the tone if one of you gentlemen can show me to the bathroom." I opened my mouth to respond, but Randy beat me to it. "There's a bucket behind the curtain. It has a lid." Karen blinked. "Excuse me." "You're excused," he said, and went back to polishing a flashlight like it had personally insulted his family. Things only got worse from there. Karen demanded a hot meal, so we offered her MREs, military-grade meals ready to eat. She poked at the chili mac like it was roadkill, then tried to connect her phone to our emergency Wi-Fi to post a storm bunker selfie. When that failed, she declared our shelter aesthetic garbage, and started rearranging supply crates to create a Zen corner. I swear on my life she tried to light a scented candle in an oxygen-controlled bunker during a natural disaster. And yet, the most dangerous part wasn't her complete disregard for survival protocols or her unhinged feng shui ambitions. It was the fact that the outer hatch had been left unsealed. Her breaking in midstorm had compromised the security of the entire shelter. That was when I stood up and said the words that shifted the room from confused silence to full alert. "You didn't close the hatch?" Karen blinked. "What hatch?" "The one with the giant red handle and biohazard warning stickers." "Oh," she said. "I didn't like the sound it made, so I left it open a little. Cue the emergency alarms." The shelter lights turned red. A siren blared once, then twice. A voice crackled over the old speaker system. "Seal breach detected. Initiate lockdown protocol." Karen screamed. "Chainsaw Mitch dove for the override switch." "And me?" I grabbed my raincoat, my flashlight, and muttered under my breath, "She better be worth it." Because now, thanks to Karen, we weren't just riding out a hurricane underground. We were riding it out in a compromised shelter, with a walking hazard in designer boots who thought emergency rations were too salty. And the worst part? We were only an hour into the storm. Karen's idea of a storm shelter, as it turned out, was more along the lines of a boutique panic room with throw pillows and an espresso machine, not a military-grade bunker stocked with MREs, water drums, and 5 semi-feral men who treat hurricanes like hunting camp. The moment the red emergency lights flipped on and the alarm gave that low mechanical growl, she stopped complaining mid-sentence and stood frozen like someone had pressed pause. The shelter door hissed as Mitch slammed the seal shut and twisted the lock into place. The thick clang echoed through the concrete chamber like a gunshot. Karen flinched. So did everyone else, but not for the same reason. We weren't scared of the storm. We were scared of the fact that we were now sealed inside with Karen and her wildly unpredictable brand of suburban chaos. Randy moved toward the command panel and typed in a quick override to reroute the airflow now that the outer door had been closed late. He didn't say anything, just let out a long, controlled sigh as he watched the oxygen levels normalize. The shelter could take a beating, it had done so before. But it wasn't designed to be open to howling winds and airborne debris for several minutes midstorm. A few things in our intake system would need checking once the hurricane passed. And if mold got into the wall insulation again, it would be Karen's name scratched into the maintenance log as the culprit. Not that she'd ever read one. Meanwhile, Karen had apparently decided to cope with the situation by pretending it was a hotel check-in gone wrong. "This is unacceptable," she snapped, pointing toward the cots. "There's no bedding. Where are the sheets? And why is there a mannequin with a gas mask sitting in the corner?" "That's Carl," said Mitch, not looking up from sharpening his skinning knife. "He's our decoy for collapse drills. He gets nervous when people talk about him like he ain't there." Karen stared at him, then stared at Carl, then backed away slowly and decided to shift her complaints toward the food again. "I need something low sodium and gluten-free." "You need perspective," Randy muttered without looking up from the comms panel. She ignored that. "And bottled water. I only drink Icelandic." "Well," I said, "we've got recycled stormwater, filtered through 5 layers of activated charcoal and UV sterilization. Unless you'd rather go lick the hurricane off the front steps." Karen looked genuinely offended, like she expected us to conjure up a minibar from one of the ammo crates. Then she stomped across the shelter, moved a crate of spare batteries, and plopped herself dramatically onto a cot. It squeaked under her weight, and she made a face like it had personally betrayed her. The rest of us did what we always do when hunkered down in the shelter. We settled into a rhythm. Randy checked the weather feeds and relayed information. Mitch handled gear inventory and perimeter monitors. Devin, who ran a survivalist YouTube channel and believed in things like tactical spoonfighting, started boiling water for tea and organizing the ration schedule. I kept track of oxygen levels, pressure seals, and whatever Karen had recently knocked over, which was currently the emergency lantern rack. An hour in, Karen declared she was bored and started pacing. 2 hours in, she tried to start a meditation circle using emergency blankets and a lavender sachet she pulled from her purse. When we explained that unnecessary fire hazards would get her duct taped to a chair, she said we were all emotionally toxic and accused the shelter of being an echo chamber of outdated masculinity. Mitch offered her a coloring book labeled Advanced Camouflage Techniques, Forest Edition, which she mistook for a passive-aggressive insult. To be fair, it kind of was. Then came the great jerky incident. She was hungry. We handed her a packet of homemade venison jerky, dry, tough, but seasoned to perfection. She took one bite, gagged theatrically, and said, "Is this meat? Like, from an actual animal?" There was silence. All 5 of us stared. "Of course it's from an actual animal," Devin said finally. "What else would it be from? Theoretical animals." Karen spit the piece into a tissue and started asking about plant-based alternative. We pointed her toward the bin marked, "Vegan, only touch if you hate flavor." She didn't laugh. Later, after the generator kicked into low power mode and we began dimming lights to conserve energy, she announced that she was going to need a private room. "There are no walls," she said, scandalized. "Where do the women sleep?" Randy glanced around the room, raised one eyebrow, and said, "Well, there's just you. So you get the corner with the toilet bucket." Karen gasped like we'd slapped her with a wet fish. Then she turned on her heel and declared she was going to write a very strongly worded review. To whom we didn't ask. By hour 5, the wind outside had picked up into a full scream. Branches and debris smacked the shelter's exterior like a war zone soundtrack. Inside, Karen was wrapped in 3 emergency blankets, sipping filtered water from a camping mug and muttering about inhuman living conditions. Mitch decided to play poker to pass the time. We used packets of instant oatmeal as chip. Karen asked if we had Uno. When we said no, she called us savages. The breaking point came when she tried to reorganize the supply crates by color. Devin had spent days sorting those crates by type, emergency tier, and expiration date. Seeing her move the water purification label to the crate containing freeze-dried chili was enough to push him to the brink. He didn't yell. He just slowly placed his spoon on the table and whispered, "If she touches one more label, I will lose what remains of my post-apocalyptic patience." I took Karen aside. Or at least, I tried to. She was mid-rant about the lack of feng shui. "Karen," I said, "this isn't a yoga retreat. It's a storm bunker in the middle of a Category 4 hurricane, and you broke into it with bolt cutters during a lockdown. You're not a guest. You're a trespasser we haven't duct taped to a chair because Randy says it violates basic morality." She gasped. "Are you threatening me?" "No," I said. "I'm begging you. Please. Stop trying to rearrange the medical supplies based on your aura." To her credit, she sat down. 4 or 5 whole minutes. Then she got up and attempted to freshen up in the corner behind the curtain. We all heard the unmistakable splash. "What is this bucket?" she shrieked. "You said this was the bathroom." "It is," I said. "Just don't knock it over." We were 12 hours into the storm by the time she finally stopped talking. Curled up in her corner, wrapped in emergency blankets, cradling a granola bar like it was a newborn kitten, Karen stared into the middle distance and whispered, "I just wanted to feel safe." I looked at the 5 men around me, the arsenal of survival gear, the humming monitors, and the reinforced walls we'd built with our bare hands. Safe was what we did. But for Karen, safety had always meant control. And here, in this concrete room full of ex-military types and doomsday junkies, she had none. That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to be a simple overnight lockdown. This was going to be a full-blown test of patience, survival, and maybe sanity. And we weren't even halfway through the hurricane yet. At some point between hour 15 and hour 16, Karen decided she'd had enough of being a guest and took it upon herself to declare a coup. The transition wasn't subtle. One moment she was quietly nibbling on a granola bar like a squirrel trying to process a nervous breakdown, and the next, she stood up in front of 5 hardened survivalists and announced, "Since none of you seem to know how to manage a shared living space, I'm taking charge." No one responded at first. Randy didn't even look up from his notebook, where he was drafting a post-disaster supply plan in microscopic handwriting. Devin blinked once, twice, then whispered, "Oh boy." Mitch made eye contact with me and gave a single slow shake of his head, as he kept sanding down the grip of a crossbow like we were about to enter a particularly absurd battle. Karen continued, undeterred. "This shelter is clearly being run with no structure, no communication, and no hygiene schedule. From this point on, I will be implementing a system to keep things orderly and civilized." She turned on her heel, pulled a Sharpie from her bag, and began drawing a chore chart on the side of an emergency supply crate. I stared in disbelief. We had survived hailstorms, lightning strikes, and a brief raccoon infestation last season, but nothing prepared us for Karen's administrative mode. She divided the board into zones and assigned us tasks like tidy common area, inventory the rations, and emotional check-in time. Chainsaw Mitch was given quiet reflection corner cleaning duty, which was ironic, since Mitch's idea of quiet reflection usually involved axes and beer. When she tried to assign Randy positive reinforcement manager, he raised his head just enough to say, "I was trained in psychological warfare, ma'am. I will not be participating." Karen either didn't hear or didn't care. She started distributing suggestion slips she'd made by tearing pages from the shelter's first aid manual and stacking them in a cup. "If you have concerns or ideas," she said, "please write them down and deposit them in the community voice box." The box, as it turned out, was the empty container from our electrolyte tablet. She even drew a heart on the lid. The first suggestion submitted was from Mitch. It read, "Please consider evacuating via the trash chute." The second was from Devin, who wrote, "How do we vote Karen off the island?" The third was mine. "Do you think raccoons can be taught to lead people out of bunkers?" Karen read each aloud with a bright smile and said, "I appreciate the humor. Humor is a coping mechanism." Once it became clear we weren't going to overthrow her new chore system directly, we decided to retaliate the way grown men trapped in a shelter with an HOA tyrant do best, through subtle and escalating pranks. It started with the classic glitter trap. Devin rigged a storage locker so that when Karen opened it, a cascade of glitter, left over from Mitch's niece's birthday party, exploded in a sparkling cloud that would haunt her clothes for days. She screamed, of course, claimed it was a targeted act of aesthetic terrorism. Mitch just grunted and said, "Now she matches her personality." Later, when she went to freshen up behind the privacy curtain, she discovered Carl the mannequin had been relocated and dressed in her rain poncho. It took her a full minute to realize Carl was not, in fact, a silent intruder. That led to more screaming. She threatened legal action against a mannequin. At some point, she tried to get revenge by messing with the ration boxes again, switching the spicy labels with mild. Unfortunately for her, that backfired. She accidentally ate a whole pouch of ghost pepper trail mix, thinking it was banana nut. Her scream that time sounded like a siren crossed with a blender. Devin offered her water. Randy offered her powdered milk just to watch her reaction. It was everything we hoped for. But the mood started to shift when the power flickered. The lights dimmed twice, then cut out completely for several seconds. The hum of the generator went silent, replaced by the hollow groan of wind hammering against the shelter's steel exterior. We all looked at each other, That silence during a storm, the kind where the air feels heavy and wrong, makes your skin itch. Randy moved fast, flashlight in hand, and made for the manual override. A moment later, emergency lights bathed the shelter in a dull red glow. The backup system had kicked in, but it wouldn't last forever. The main generator wasn't responding. Water must have breached the ventilation lines, Devin muttered. If the drainage trench clogged, it could have backed into the intake. Karen, panicking now, gripped her glitter-speckled jacket and asked, "What does that mean?" "It means," said Randy, crouching beside the panel, "we've got maybe 8 hours on backup power if we're careful. Less if someone starts burning lavender candles again." Karen looked hurt, which normally might have made me feel something, but by that point I was too busy trying to trace the emergency power diagram. I motioned for Mitch to check the intake corridor. He nodded and grabbed a headlamp and wrench. Just as he opened the utility hatch to the side tunnel, a burst of wet air came in. A fine mist sprayed into the room, followed by the unmistakable sound of sloshing water. We'd prepped the tunnel with a waterproof seal, but it wasn't meant to stay open more than a few seconds. Mitch slammed the panel back down. "It's breached," he grunted. "Water's already a foot deep. Rising fast." Karen backed up against the cot, pale. "Are we going to drown?" "No," I said, "not unless someone opens the hatch again." "I didn't open anything," she snapped. "Yeah," I said, "but you left the main door open for 2 minutes during a literal hurricane, so maybe just don't touch anything else." Karen seemed ready to cry. Or scream. Or both. She paced the room in circles, muttering, "This is not how this was supposed to go. I just wanted to be safe. I just wanted some peace. I'm not supposed to be here." None of us responded. The storm was battering the shelter, the power was shaky, and now we had flooding in a side corridor that led directly beneath the main storage unit. If that area went underwater, we'd lose 2 weeks of food, half the tools, and every dry sock we had. That was when Mitch, still dripping from checking the tunnel, said, "We'll have to patch the tunnel from the inside. Seal it from this end, reinforce the wall. Should buy us time." Devin added, "But if it breaches completely, we'll need to evacuate to the upper hatch. The escape shaft." Karen's face turned white. "Escape shaft? You mean there's another way out?" "It's vertical," Randy said. 15 feet straight up, no ladder, only hand grip. Built for emergency only." Karen whimpered. "I can't climb." "Well," said Mitch, pulling off his boots and digging into the emergency patch kit, "guess you better start stretching." And for the first time since she entered the shelter, Karen didn't say a word. Karen spent the next hour pacing the shelter in frantic silence, clearly rattled by the mention of a vertical escape route. It was like the concept of climbing anything without a staircase or banister had short-circuited her entire internal wiring. Meanwhile, Mitch and Randy were hard at work sealing the leaking side tunnel with a mix of reinforced tarp, industrial adhesive, and a wall of sandbags we kept stashed under the bunk. We'd built this place for the worst, and this was pretty close to it. The storm outside raged louder now, sending bone-deep rumbles through the shelter's concrete frame. We could hear trees snapping, debris slamming into the steel walls, and distant, irregular booms that might have been propane tanks or just really unlucky lawn furniture. Karen tried to help at one point. Or, more accurately, she tried to supervise. She offered advice like, "You should put the blue tarp on top. It's more calming, and I think you're stacking those sandbags unevenly." At one point she pulled out her phone again, even though we'd all explained there was no signal, and attempted to record a vlog. "Live from the storm shelter," she said in a stage whisper. "Day 2 of being held underground by 5 grizzled men who might be doomsday preppers or just very grumpy." Devin took the phone from her, flipped it off, and handed it back wordlessly. Things got worse when the water alarm went off again. A secondary leak had sprung somewhere behind the backup generator, and we had to start rationing power for real. Lights dimmed to near nothing. Heat cut off. Only the central command panel stayed lit, giving the shelter an eerie glow that made everyone look like they'd aged a decade in a few minutes. Karen shivered, wrapped in her emergency blanket cocoon, and asked if anyone had a spare portable heater. I offered her the joy of physical labor. She declined. Randy pulled out the climbing gear. It wasn't much. Mostly carabiners, some nylon rope, gloves, and a harness or two left over from when we installed the shelter's vertical escape shaft. The shaft wasn't meant for comfort. It was 15 feet of concrete pipe straight up, capped with a secondary steel hatch on the surface. Emergency access only. No frills. No rails. Just desperation and determination. And Karen, looking at it, had neither. "You've got to be kidding me," she said when she saw it. That's not even ADA compliant." "Nope," Randy said, testing a carabiner. "It's hurricane compliant." "What if I fall?" she asked. "Try not to," said Mitch, already tightening his gloves. She looked at me, like maybe I'd be the voice of reason. "Maybe the nice one." I said, "Well, you can stay down here and drown. Or you can climb. Up to you." Devin volunteered to go first, scurrying up like a squirrel with tactical training. He reached the top in under 2 minutes, popped the hatch, and disappeared into the rain above. A few moments later, his voice echoed down the shaft. "Clear up here. Rain's brutal, but ground's holding. No trees down on the hatch. Bring the gear." Randy went next, hauling a duffel of essentials. Mitch followed with more supplies and one of the emergency radio unit. That left me and Karen. I handed her gloves, a harness, and a helmet she immediately rejected because it clashed with her jacket. I didn't argue. I just strapped her in and clipped the harness into the rope rig. She looked up the dark shaft like it was a stairway to actual hell. "I don't think I can do this," she said, voice small. "You can," I said. "You don't have a choice." She started climbing. Slowly. Painfully. Her nails scraped the concrete. Her boots slipped. She yelped more than once. At one point she got stuck halfway and screamed, "I'm dying! I'm actually dying!" Randy, from the top, shouted back, "You're 4 feet from the ground. Keep moving." When she finally crawled out of the shaft, soaked and panting like she'd run a marathon uphill through molasses, we gave her a round of polite golf clap. It wasn't sarcasm. Well, okay, it was 80% sarcasm. But 20% real. Because she actually did it. Somehow, against every odd, she didn't quit halfway through and demand a helicopter. The storm above ground was biblical. Trees bent like rubber. Water rushed down the hills in thick brown current. The sky was a swirling mess of gray and green. We made it to the barn, our fallback structure, under sheets of sideways rain. It wasn't as fortified as the bunker, but it was high ground, well stocked, and dry. For now. Karen collapsed on a hay bale and declared she might have hypothermia. Mitch brought her a blanket. Devin handed her a warm can of chili. She looked like she wanted to complain but didn't have the energy. For the first time she was quiet. That night, with the storm still pounding outside and the barn rattling like an old freight train, we sat in a circle around the emergency heater and played cards. Karen watched us. Then, surprising everyone, she spoke. "I just didn't want to be alone." We all looked up. The barn creaked. Rain slammed the roof. No one said anything. She added, "I know I act like I know everything. But I don't." I panicked. My house wasn't safe. I didn't know what else to do. Randy nodded once. "You picked the worst possible method." "I know," she said. "I'm sorry." That word settled into the barn like dust on old wood. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was real. And for the first time since she cut her way into our shelter like an over-caffeinated raccoon, she sounded like a human being instead of a walking HOA newsletter. Mitch passed her a marshmallow from his bug-out bag. She took it. We didn't forgive her, not fully, not yet. But we didn't toss her into the storm either. And that, given the circumstances, felt like progress. By the time the storm let up, the world outside looked like it had been hit with a giant blender on puree. Trees were uprooted, power lines down, roads buried under water and branches. The barn, despite a few leaks and a missing side panel, had held strong. We woke up to an eerie calm, that strange silence only a post-hurricane morning brings, like the earth itself had finally exhaled after holding its breath all night. The sun was trying to break through a bruised sky, and steam rose from the wet fields like ghost trails. Karen was the last one to wake. She'd curled up in the corner of the hayloft like a tired cat, wrapped in 2 emergency blankets and Mitch's backup hoodie, which she had borrowed without asking and somehow turned into a fashion scarf overnight. When she finally climbed down the ladder and saw the light coming through the cracked barn doors, she didn't say anything. Just stood there and stared at the wreckage of the world she used to run with passive-aggressive emails and HOA citations. We made coffee on the propane burner, strong and bitter, just the way Randy liked it. No one really spoke much. We were all too busy staring at the aftermath, taking silent inventory of what was gone, what might still be standing, and what we'd need to rebuild. Karen joined us eventually, holding her cup with both hands like it might keep her grounded. She looked different. Less blow-dried, more real. Maybe it was the hair frizzed from humidity, or the glitter that still refused to leave her jacket, but something had shifted. Around noon, we decided to hike back to the main shelter. Not because we wanted to, but because we had to assess the damage. The path down was slick, flooded in places, and blocked by limbs the size of small cars. We moved slowly, helping each other over the rough spots. Karen didn't complain once. She even grabbed the end of a broken fence post and helped clear debris without prompting. No one praised her. We just noticed. The shelter door was still sealed tight, but the outer perimeter had taken a beating. The ventilation tower was dented, the power relay system flooded, and the whole west-facing wall of the exterior fence had vanished like it had never existed. We unsealed the hatch, climbed down, and stepped into the quiet. The emergency lights still glowed faintly. The air was stale, damp. A layer of glitter, somehow undisturbed, still sparkled in the far corner like the ghost of a very specific kind of chaos. Inside we checked everything. Supplies mostly intact. The backup water filtration had kicked in, and while the electronics were fried in spots, the structure itself held firm. Carl the mannequin had survived, though someone had drawn a mustache on him in permanent marker. Karen said nothing, just followed us from room to room, inspecting the damage, taking notes on a scrap of packaging cardboard with a borrowed pen. When it was all said and done, we stood there in silence. This shelter had been our stronghold, our symbol of self-reliance. And now, thanks to one badly timed act of desperation, it needed a full systems rebuild. Still, it had done what it was meant to do. It had protected us. Even her. As we packed up what we could carry and prepared to hike back up, Karen turned to me and said something I didn't expect. "I want to help fix it." I blinked. "Fix what?" "The shelter," she said. "I messed it up. I know that. Let me help rebuild it. I'm not useless. I know people. I can fundraise. I can call in favors. I even know a contractor or two who owe me for a few design favors." She looked around. "I can make this better. Stronger. Nicer." Randy raised an eyebrow. "You mean prettier?" She didn't flinch. "No. I mean functional. Stormproof. Comfortable without compromising the point. I get it now. This isn't a clubhouse or a Fallout fantasy. This is survival. I didn't understand that before. I do now." We didn't give her an answer. Not right away. But we didn't say no either. The following week was a whirlwind. News crews came through the area to film recovery efforts. Most skipped our corner, assuming nothing of interest happened on a patch of land filled with mud, cows, and dented metal. That was until Devin posted a 10-minute highlight reel on his YouTube channel. It opened with Karen cutting the lock on the shelter, included slow-motion footage of the glitter bomb, Karen screaming at Carl, a dramatic montage of the emergency tunnel flooding, and a surprisingly touching ending of Karen climbing the vertical shaft in full survival mode. The video went viral in under 48 hours. By the third day, Karen had a nickname on social media. Shelter Karen, they called her. But it wasn't entirely mocking. The comments section was split between people roasting her and others praising her for facing the consequences and coming out the other side more human than before. Then came the fundraiser. She called it Project Fortress. Set up a campaign page. Uploaded photos of the damage. Told her side of the story with just enough honesty and just enough shame to make it land. It caught fire. Donations rolled in. Contractors offered help. An architect even sent over a mock-up for a secondary reinforced entry system that could prevent breaches during future storms. Within a week, we had blueprints, materials, and volunteers. And Karen, to everyone's surprise, including probably her own, was out there in boots and jeans, handing out sandwiches to laborers, hauling insulation rolls, even helping repaint the inside. Mitch said she still couldn't tell the difference between a socket wrench and a pipe clamp, but she took directions without sass and worked until her mascara was more mud than makeup. 2 weeks after the rebuild started, we held a community barbecue. Just some burgers, beer, and a little music in the barn. Karen showed up with a casserole and a 6-pack of non-alcoholic cider. She didn't try to take over. Didn't demand a microphone. Just sat on a hay bale, laughed when Devin retold the story of the chili mix switcheroo, and passed around plates like any other neighbor. At some point, she pulled me aside and handed me a small plaque. It was simple, metal, laser-etched. No Karens beyond this point, except that one. I laughed harder than I had in days. Before she left that night, she said, "You know, I think I found what I was looking for. Not safety. Not control. Just people who don't need me to be perfect." "You're still not getting a key to the shelter," I said. She grinned. "Fair." And just like that, she was part of the story. Not the villain, not the disaster, but the twist nobody saw coming. The one we'd talk about every storm season, with a beer in one hand and just enough sarcasm to remember how close we'd come to disaster, and how, somehow, the one person we thought would ruin everything helped us build it back better than before.